Today we have Dr. Oliver Hartley, very special alumni guest today to speak to you about commercial solar. I think probably many of you know Oliver already. If you don't, Oliver is currently Managing Director of ePho, which is a newly set up company by Oliver for commercial solar systems in Australia. Oliver was previously the Managing Director of QCells Australia, and also formerly at QCells and Calixo in Germany. And also Oliver is of course, UNSW PV alumni. So please welcome Oliver.
Thank you very much, Linda, and I'm pleased to see so many faces here today. So commercial solar at least gets some interest, that's great. So what I want to do over the next 45 minutes or so is give you a bit of a view on commercial solar in Australia. And when Linda sent out the invitation, she actually forgot one important thing on her little invitation, and that is actually that question mark here at the end. I don't know why she dropped that, but that's actually quite important. The reason is, and I'll show you that later, how the Australian market has developed. But commercial solar is a lot talked about, but as a matter of fact, not that much has happened yet in that segment. And we'll have to see how much will happen over the next few years. I personally obviously have a bias towards commercial solar. I believe in the market, but it's actually much trickier than most people assume it is. So let me go through what question I want to answer in this little seminar. So if you have any questions during the presentation, just air them, or we collect them at the end. We just see how it goes. The group is small enough to do that. So I quickly want to tell you who ePho is on one slide. Then I'm going to go back what has happened over the last few years in the solar industry. And that's quite important actually to then look forward what the issues are. Then, does commercial solar actually make sense? Is there a fundamental need we fulfill delivering commercial solar? And then this question, well, why is it, if it makes sense, why is it taking off so slowly? What are the roadblocks? Then, do I get what was promised? Is a lot down to commercial solar is really an investment in a long-term asset where long-term returns are expected from your clients and from the investors, and do the investors actually get what they were promised? And we'll look into that, how we monitor it, what you can forecast, what the risks are around that, and how you mitigate these risks, and we'll just a short summary. Oh, sorry, that's wrong computer. Okay, just very quickly on ePho. So ePho is about credibility with a capital C. A lot of times I hear, it doesn't matter what you know, it is who you know. And this might be right, but when it comes to commercial solar, I really beg to differ. You actually need to know what you're talking about and how to deliver the systems. Otherwise, you have a system that might last only for a couple of years, and then you have, but not for the 25 years. So I do think commercial solar differs quite significantly from residential solar, which I will explain a little bit later, why it differs, and that you actually need to know what you're doing. So ePho is a company full of solar geeks. We all have decades of solar experience, and we develop, engineer, procure, construct, commission, operate, and maintain commercial solar and only commercial solar systems. So it's all about connecting Australian businesses to the sun and offsetting some of their electricity needs by photovoltaics and solar electricity. I understand I'm here at the uni, and so I'm only going to spend a couple of seconds on this because I do understand it's a public lecture. I'm not quite sure if everybody's completely across solar. So just very, very briefly, obviously we get our photons from the sun. They hit our solar panels. The solar panels convert the photons into DC electricity, direct current electricity, which then gets converted into AC, and then that electricity is either used on the premises in their appliances or loads, or it gets exported to the grid. At this stage, when we propose commercial solar, it's very, very rarely about off-grid or isolating a business from the grid. It's always just substituting the need of drawing electricity from the grid. So that's what commercial solar is about for us. Here's a bit the hockey stick of the Australian PV market. I think you've seen it many times before. It was basically flat at zero for decades, and then in 2009-10 the first government program starts, and then it went up with the feed-in tariffs and other mechanisms like the renewable energy target and the different schemes we have there. It looks like a brilliant, smooth, relatively smooth hockey stick, and all in all, at the moment we have 3.2 gigawatts of solar installed in Australia, which actually puts Australia at, I think, number 8 or 9 in the world. So it's really punching above its weight, which is great. From this slide, you think it was all plain sailing. Well, it wasn't. This shows you now a month-by-month data of what kind of PV was installed over the last few years. And you see these massive ups and downs, what a lot of people call the solar coaster. So it grew steadily. Then there was, in 2011, this mad rush with the end of the gross feed-in tariff in New South Wales. That was then stopped, and bang, it went down. It sort of went sideways for a little while. Then the multipliers came up, STCs, the small technology scales multipliers, from 5 down to 3, and so on and so forth. So the policies behind renewable energy plays a massive role in photovoltaics and in the industry in Australia. And that means that the industry really never gets boring. It's not for the faint-hearted. You have to be quite stress resistant when you're in solar industry, just to warn you on that matter. But nevertheless, the industry is still going strong. The grey line shows you what is actually installed at the moment. The blue line is the STCs. They always lag a little bit behind, so you see that after a few months, everything that is installed is also registered. So at the moment, we're ticking over at about 2 megawatts per month, which isn't bad at all. So where do these 2 megawatts go? Australia is the country of small systems. It differs massively from most other markets in the world. Overall, worldwide, about over 50%, actually 55% was published last month, go into utility scale solar. So big solar, ground-mounted solar power plants. In Australia, that's very different. Australia is the residential market, and you see here the system size. This is this average system size for February, August going backwards in time. And the average system size went in 2010 from around, not quite 1.5. It grew, it tripled to 4.5 kilowatts. Massive, very small compared to everybody else in the world. This shows you that it's completely dominated by the residential market, and it shows you how the number of system and kilowatts did develop, but it shows you as well with this ratio that the spread here goes up a bit further. But nevertheless, even at the moment, it is relatively small systems. So what's going to happen in the future now? I borrowed this graph from Nigel Morris, who runs Solar Business Services. And this is a forecast he published last year in his medium scenario. Let me quickly explain what we see here. Residential, grid-connected, distributed. So the main market of Australia. Despite the fact that it actually decreased between 2012 and 2013, it's sort of going sideways and then slightly recovering again. Then there are two other segments. The grid-connected, distributed from 10 to 30 kilowatts and 30 to 100 kilowatts. This is the commercial solar market which I'm talking about. So, funnily enough, Nigel predicts not that much of a growth. It has changed a little bit over the last 6 months. I think Nigel would agree that these numbers are now higher, but nevertheless, it's not all of a sudden a hockey stick or an explosion that's going to happen. And then we have this segment, which is the grid connect centralized solar farms, which is basically the farms that First Solar puts up and Photovoltaics in Canberra and these kind of power plants. They are very much driven by government incentives and like the solar flagship program. So whatever happens up here is a big question mark, because it heavily relies on the policies behind these different drivers. So that's the forecast overall and across the entire market. So what happens more on that distributed energy? And that's a graph that gives you a bit of an idea what is now one of the most recent forecasts published in the Climate Spectator in April. So you see the green bars is the residential system, and it's a bit, it mirrors what I showed in that graph earlier. It's still doing reasonably well, going sideways, and that blue area is the commercial. It is growing, but it's not really a hockey stick that goes increases rapidly. Now, another last slide, don't go on the details, but these are the actual numbers of 10 to 30 kilowatt systems in 2011, 12 and 13 in the different states. And you see there was still a bit of a feed-in tariff happening here. It then came back down, and you see a steady upwards trend. And at the moment, 2014, that's clearly continuing. And the same on the 30 to 100 kilowatt system. Not much happening in 2011, but then 2012 and 13, certainly an increase, a steady increase. And that's actually what excites me about the commercial market. There is, and I will show you that later, there is a fundamental need and a fundamental business case. It makes economic sense. And whenever you have that, whatever happens on a political landscape, it doesn't really matter that much anymore, because you have a substantial, you have a fundamental business case that stacks up. Okay, let's now move from some of the forecasts and graphs and estimates away and go more into the detail of commercial solar. Why commercial solar makes sense is actually shown quite nicely here on a graph from Energex. This is the load profile at an industrial substation. It shows the demand over 24 hours. So this is down here, is from midnight to midnight. And you see that around sort of in the early morning hours, 6, 7 o'clock, the demand goes up, and goes up and down a bit, and then late afternoon it tailors off and goes back and then comes up again. And this is the profile that solar generates. So it matches really nicely with commercial solar. This is quite different to residential. That's why residential, all of a sudden, when there are no feed-in tariffs, no gross and net feed-in tariffs, it becomes much more difficult. During the day, most people are not at home. They're at work, or they're at uni, or they're at school, and that's where people don't use electricity at home, whilst the commercial businesses is exactly the time of the day when electricity is used. So fundamentally, commercial solar makes sense. Now, there are these obstacles. Commercial solar is an investment decision, so there are lots of stakeholders that need to play ball. There is sometimes a board, a company board, there is an accountant, a CFO, there's a facility manager that needs to come on board, there is the general operations manager that needs to play ball, and everything needs to come together to actually make the case work. And there are three main factors that need to be balanced. One is your roof. If you don't have a roof in your business, or your roof is completely full with other stuff, it just doesn't work for solar. You need a roof area, unless you have a area at the back where you can do a ground mount system, but mainly it's going to be on roof. So that's the first thing that needs to work. Second thing is your power usage. If you are a restaurant and you only open at night, commercial solar just wouldn't work for you. That's just one of these fundamentals. And that's why I said earlier, at the moment we're really only talking about commercial solar to substitute electricity need from the grid. If you then talk about storage and other things, obviously everything changes. However, if you look at the economics, very clearly, as soon as you package storage and battery storage or other things into it, the economics don't stack up anymore at this point in time. It will over the next few years, but today, if you only look at the economics, it's only solar that substitutes your need from the grid that matters. So your power usage is very, very important. And then timeline. So when we talk to clients, it's very important what do they want to do with their business going forward. If they say, I want to sell my business next year or shut down, It's a very short conversation about solar. We might move on to the next topic. So timeline is a third one that needs to make sense. Okay, let me just quickly run you through some stuff. So this is an example how it works in real life. This is a big Catholic high school out in Orange. Lots of roofs there, so we went through an iterative process to find the best roofs. So at the beginning, it's really just a matter of marking some of the roofs that would be suitable for solar, or potentially suitable for solar. And then we jump from there into the detailed layout where we do the proper design. And in some cases, when we then have the structure engineers coming in and verify that the building or the roof is actually suitable for solar, it might turn out that this wonderful north-facing roof is not suitable because it was a little bit built earlier, maybe in the 60s, and the roof structure is just not strong enough to carry the additional weight. So we had to rule that out and went back to the drawing board and readjust it and try to measure that. Another thing which actually what I put up here is one that we come across a lot at the moment here in Australia when we do commercial solar. There are hundreds and hundreds of solar companies in Australia, ranging from very small ones, from really literally just a man and his ute, all the way up to big companies with hundreds of employees. Normally, a residential system is installed by the guy, takes his 6 panels in the morning, drives to the residential home, gets out, climbs on the roof, puts the 6 panels on the roof, and he walks off, and the job is done in 2 or 3 hours. No real design requirement. Very rarely is there a site visit up front. You know, it doesn't really matter that much. On commercial solar, however, the world changes. Particularly, it varies a bit from state to state, but let's say in New South Wales, when you go over 10 kilowatts, you all of a sudden need to have a compliant development certificate. So you need to actually, it's not quite a development approval, but you need to go through council to get these certificates. You have to talk to the grid providers and so on and so forth. There are a lot of little things. None of it itself is difficult, but because there are so many hurdles, a lot of the existing companies just struggle to deliver on their promises with regard to commercial solar. That's the second thing. So the roof needs to be right, and after a couple of iterations, you probably have the structure that you want to have on the roof. The second thing is that power usage. And there again, you think your subject you study might be difficult. Some of these power bills at least match that. They are simple power bills up here, where you basically have only one fixed rate. In this case, it's 36 cents per kilowatt hour. And you have a fixed daily charge. That's all that matters for your bill. If you then go to larger consumers of electricity, that changes dramatically. It's actually a real science to understand what's happening on these different bills. There are about a dozen or so different charges. Some of them are charged against cents per kilowatt hour, so the actual usage, some demand charges, some are daily charges, some are other fixed charges. So you have to plow through here and actually find out what your solar system would actually substitute. Obviously, a solar system doesn't substitute a daily fixed charge. That will be there whether you use solar or not, right? Because you're still relying on the grid. So it's quite a lot of work to sift through this kind of information. So once you have understood your electricity bill and you're basically trying to extract the value of your solar, the next thing what you need to do is basically understand the consumption of your particular client. What is the commercial business actually using? And what we do with a lot of these, in these circumstances, is we get half an hourly data. So we analyze 17,520 data points over a 12 months period. When you're a larger consumer, you basically get that data from your retailer, and they then pass it on to us, and we do a lot of number crunching. That's one part of the equation. The other part of the equation is then, what is the solar system actually, what is this, the generation profile of your solar system? And there we basically run a simulation where we actually also throw in random weather data. So we say, okay, we have a rainy day, we have a good sunshine day, because it can happen that you have a great sunshine a day with sunshine on a Saturday or Sunday, but the business doesn't use any electricity on Saturdays and Sundays. And obviously you have to take that into your consideration when you evaluate the benefit of what solar is creating. I've chosen this example here because it's quite a striking one, because it's the school again. Obviously during Mondays to Fridays, the school, their usage goes up in the morning when the teachers and students come in. During the day they have this red profile, and then in the afternoon it goes down and goes to in sort of an overnight mode. The solar system on this particular day, on the 6th of February 2013, would have produced this amount of electricity. It was a very nice sunny day, and this is what we would have offset. So the new profile of the school would have been this little blue line. The yellow area is the savings that the solar system would have generated, and that's the value the commercial solar system have. On a weekend, you have that sunny day, but obviously the school hardly uses any electricity, and most of it is fed into the grid. Now the problem is, with most of the electricity that is fed into the grid, you get 0 cents per kilowatt hour. Just the way it is. You might be able to negotiate something with your retailer, but it really depends very much on your buying power and your retailer. So we go through that, and I think that's how it should be done, day by day, and extract how much would we really save the school or the client. And in this particular case, we will save the school about 30% of their electricity, and the school actually saves $30,000 per annum. They pay back the system about 5 years. So it's a very, very good case, and because it's a Catholic school, they had the money as well to invest directly. All right. So this is actually now a system, straight line. I'm not running an economics course here, so it's really very simple. Your initial investment, and then you have your annual savings, which obviously create the benefit. And after 4 or 5 years, you have your money back, which you initially invested, and thereafter it's all plain sailing. You still have then 20 years of free electricity. And that is quite actually an interesting concept, because you're probably aware that in economics, normally when you have supply and demand, the price that a good should go to is actually the marginal cost of producing an extra unit of that product or that good. Obviously here it's a kilowatt hour. That's the benefit, that's the good that's produced here. And solar can produce that extra unit at 0 cost. The sun comes up, so the system, once it's paid off, produces electricity. So whatever happens on the electricity market, whatever happens around in the world, solar by definition is the cheapest way of producing electricity, because it's at 0 cents per kilowatt hour. So the long-term hedging position for a client is extremely strong when he's got the solar system on his roof. Now, okay, this is all sort of hypothetical. Yep, solar meets, I have a roof, it meets my usage, or my usage pattern matches quite nicely with the generation pattern of the solar system, and I basically I'm willing to do it. My timeline is long enough to actually contemplate to have a solar system. How do I now go about it? How do I finance it? Shall I take my own money? Do I go to the bank? What are the options? So there are 3 fundamental options to approach this issue. The first one is you have the money, like the Catholic school. They have the money, they wanted to invest it, and for them it was then basically important what would they save per annum and what is the return on investment they're getting. So that's on the left-hand side. You can secure quite attractive returns. I mean, we're talking about 20% IRRs and stuff like that. You own the system, you have the full depreciation, and it's a relatively simple and straightforward value proposition. Drawback is obviously you have to put the capital on the table right away, and you're fully responsible for the system. The second one is a leasing option. There are many off-the-shelf leasing products available these days for commercial solar, from small boutique leasing brokerage companies all the way to the big banks. And the benefit is you don't have an initial investment. The other benefit is pretty simple. You know exactly what you're spending every month. That is in your leasing agreement. The drawback is you have to pay for your leasing rate no matter what. Whether the system performs or not, you just have to pay for it. You signed up and you have to pay. And obviously, particularly if you go to and get one of these off-the-shelf type of products, the rates are relatively high. We're talking about 10 to 12% interest rates, you know, for these leasing things. So when we work with clients, we often talk to them and see whether their local bank can help them to get better rates. And the third one that is currently not really available on mass scale, it's just sort of happening, is a power purchase agreement. That is, in essence, that the client is not interested in the solar system at all. He's only interested in reducing his power bill by using cheaper electricity, and the cheaper electricity happens to be produced by the solar system. So in that sense, the solar system is not owned by the tenant or the owner of the building. It's owned by a third party, by investors or the bank. And then we only sell the electricity to the user of the building. It doesn't require any ownership by the owner of the building or the tenant. It's the purchase. You only pay for the kilowatt hours you actually get from the solar system, and you basically have no performance risk. The drawback is you obviously don't get the return on investment on the solar system, and you basically don't get that free electricity anymore after the certain period of time, because you keep on paying for the electricity. And it's more complex, and that's actually quite an issue, because I showed you earlier, at the moment the systems are all relatively small. We're talking about 50 to 100 kilowatt systems. If you then have setup costs, legal costs, or a third-party investment cost and stuff like that, that very often pushes the rates that the customer needs to pay for a sensible PPA above the level they're actually willing to pay. And it also means that if a company wants to sell electricity, generally they either have to have a retail license or they need to be exempt from a retail license, and that's a process where you have to apply with the Australian energy regulator, and you have to jump through a few hoops to get this. Let me go a little bit deeper into the second one, the leasing. This is a very busy slide, and I don't want you to try to read any of the numbers. I just want you to understand the concept, because I think that is really quite interesting, and I think it will change the industry quite remarkably. What's happening here is basically that the solar system is financed by an operating lease. So just quickly, if you're not aware of the concept, normally when you go to the bank and you borrow money or you have a finance lease, you're the owner of the system and you just pay your rates. Yes, the bank or the financing companies might keep the right to the system, but in essence it's about you getting the ownership of the system. Then the system is yours and you depreciate it over the 20 years period, and you pay back your principal and your interests. With an operating lease, it's very different. You don't own the system. The operating lease is a pure expense, so it's fully tax deductible, which is a huge benefit for commercial businesses. Normally when you then have your operating lease and you let that run over 5 years and you have a minimal balloon payment at the end, this means you pay maybe one more month and then it becomes yours. So from your expense line on your P&L, it goes to your balance sheet. The attractive thing is the following. You see that here. The first sort of 5 years during your operating lease, you're basically running a black zero, which means that whatever you're paying for your operating lease is offset by your savings from your electricity bill. And in some cases, particularly for sort of small to medium-sized businesses, it actually means that they're saving money from day one. So their savings on the electricity bill is bigger than what they have to pay for the operating lease. Which down here, at the end of the further 5 years, you know, this particular client would have saved $300 in the first year. It's not much. However, after 5 years, he basically owns the system without paying an additional dollar, and then he gets the full benefit, and it goes and increases. And in this particular circumstance, this client would save about $10,000 per annum. All right. Now, this is try to explain, what are the factors you have to balance: the roof, the timeline, your power usage. These three factors. I explained that from an economic point of view, it makes a lot of sense to do solar. Now let's look a little bit why it's not happening and what are the roadblocks on commercial solar. Taking one step back, commercial solar, very easy. You have your panels up here. You obviously, as I said, the inverter, and either you use it inside the building or it goes to the grid. So there are three things that need to come together. You need to have good components, otherwise you won't enjoy any benefits for the 25 years. You need good engineering, and you need a good installation. And all three come together like a puzzle. All of a sudden, you really have high system yields for 25 years. Solar can be very, very reliable. What is wrong? This is what we see quite a bit. Because the mentality at the moment of the solar market is very much in line with residential. And yes, I give you a residential solar system, and I also put in a bottle of wine or something like that. This was the race we've seen over the last couple of years, the race to the bottom of solar. And there are a lot of solar companies that actually grew to really big companies with hundreds of employees. Next day they were gone. For whatever reason, there was another one who undercut them, another one was cheaper, and the whole business model just fell apart, and they had to shut shop, and there were big insolvency cases with a lot of millions and millions of dollars lost. So this is actually luckily not happening that much in commercial solar yet, and I hope it won't happen, because I explained earlier, commercial solar has just some challenges that a lot of the residential companies just can't really make it work. And this is this stuff which I'm talking about. There is quite a lot of engineering work required. Now, this is a 100 kilowatt system on a new aged care facility, a big one, where we had to deal with a lot of HVAC stuff on the roofs, with fire escape stuff and so on and so forth, and we had to make it all fit nicely onto the roof space. We obviously then have all that different roof areas, and we do a detailed shading analysis. Obviously, if you have a larger system, you really need to be able to do the full single line diagram. You need to be able to talk on eye-to-eye level with the network provider to actually get the grid connection done. And you need to do a full loss analysis to know, well, this is what the that's the sunshine hours you get onto your roof. What do you actually get out at the end of the day after you subtracted all the soiling losses, shading losses, general resistance in your cables, and so on and so forth. So there's quite a bit of work involved. And if you want to go further, and I want to see if this works, you can actually go to some very extreme levels. In this circumstances, this is a building in North Sydney which has 2 massive billboards. And when we looked at it, we thought, why are we trying to actually put a solar system on there? It's really shaded. So we thought, okay, well, let's not just let our guts decide this. Let's do the full analysis. So we can. There is supposed to be a movie where we really analyzed the path of the sun, summer and winter, where we exactly look at the shading during the day. In the summer, hardly any shading, and in the winter, when it's obviously comes in much lower, we have more shading. And all this plays into extracting the value of the solar system to make the economic case for the client. So he's got all that at the moment, and we think the system still makes sense, so we are waiting whether the client wants to go ahead or not. Now, the other thing is what I said earlier, it is quite a lot of engineering work, and just this level of detail you have to watch out for. The second part is really the installation. This is how typically residential systems get installed, and already this is a good installation because at least the conduits are marked. But in reality, if you think about the commercial systems where the investment can be 100,000, 200,000 or even more, do you really trust that this permanent marker is permanently on there for 25 years? I would doubt it. Right? So what we think and how some companies work with quality assurance programs and something like that you basically have proper, like in any other commercial electrical industry, that we do this properly. But believe it or not, it is quite a step up for the industry. Our Australian solar industry is completely geared towards the residential market, and it will be a general development which we have to live through in Australia. The other thing is on the monitoring side. Less than 1% of solar systems are monitored in Australia. And that's quite remarkable, considering the system is supposed to last for 25 years. My bet, and I think a lot of people would agree with me, we'll see a lot of solar, we have a lot of solar systems in Australia that actually perform below what they should do. For whatever reasons, whether it's component or installations or tree or soiling, it doesn't matter what it is, but people don't really check how well their system is performing. This is obviously very different at commercial solar because you are actually selling return on investments and a value proposition. So you can go in a lot of detail on forecasting commercial solar. And one big factor you have to take into consideration is obviously the sunshine. And it is fluctuating quite remarkably. And this is Sydney. And you see the average sunshine data here from 1990 all the way to 2013. And you see the long-term average. So the long-term average is what goes into your financial modeling. But you see in reality, it can fluctuate quite significantly from year to year. And if you have that honest discussion with your client and show them that this is what can happen, you manage the expectation quite differently than when you just take the long-term average and say, no, it will be all right, mate. It might not be all right. It might fluctuate. And obviously that's on the annual basis, but we have this massive fluctuation from day to day. So this is a system in orange, and there's a real life data, perfect solar day, this is just beautiful, but in between we have these rainy days, so all this needs to be considered when you monitor and analyze the performance of your system. Now, what you can then do is if you go through and put forward the economic case to your client, you basically then also need to discuss with them, well, what can happen? What are the variances around this expected rate of return? And here you can do, if you're a bit more sophisticated and want to have this more honest discussion with your client, you can actually go into statistics and do probability analysis. What I showed you earlier was the annual sunshine in Sydney. This is basically this peak of this distribution curve here. In average, we have about sort of 1680 or 90, something like that, kilowatt hours per square meter of sunshine. And obviously, we assume that it's normally distributed. It's not quite correct, but this is an assumption we make just to simplify the stuff. And it's just too long ago that I learned statistics, so I take that simplification. You obviously see then the cumulative distribution, and obviously at some stage you go towards 1 because the sun has to come up. What you can then do is basically do this P90, P95 and P99 analysis. And I don't know, for you who work in wind, it's a very clear concept there. It's basically the probability that you have of 90% that you have a value that is greater than that P90 value. And in wind, that's a standard practice. In solar, it's not yet. But obviously, you can do it. No reason why you can't do it. So what you see here is basically these values of the P90, P95, and P99. So if you wanted to talk to your client, you want to say with a probability of 95%, you will get that return per annum, you basically have to take your P95 value for your commercial analysis. In this case, in Sydney, we have 1684 as the average value of sunshine. For a P95 analysis, you can take this 1563 and you are basically 7% below the long-term average. So with 95% probability, will your customer get a return in this particular year if you take this value as an input variable for your sunshine data. And through this, you can basically build a lot of credibility and trust with your client, that particularly when the accountants come in and auditors and others who will basically try to challenge you on your value proposition for your client, you can basically argue and say, okay, we have gone through this variance analysis, this is the case for solar, this is the likelihood you will get 15, 20 or whatever % return in any given year. All right, let's now look a bit on the actual output of some systems with this fluctuation. So you see here a system in Mount Isa, 154 kilowatts installed there in end of 2010. In Mount Isa, you see this yellow bar, this is the long-term sunshine average, so much higher than in Sydney, but that's the long-term average. This value should give you an average output of the system of around 1772 kilowatt hours per kilowatt peak. So this is this value. Now in 2011, we had a little bit less sunshine. This is what the system then should have produced with this lesser sunshine, and this is what the system actually produced. So pretty much spot on. 1724 was actually produced versus 1671. And in 2012, we had a bit more sunshine. Again, this violet little bar here is what the system should have produced using this actual value, and this is what the system produced in real life. So solar is extremely predictable. You can really forecast. If you do the analysis, if you get the right data, you can really say what the system is going to produce over the coming years. All right. That already brings me to the summary on this overview on the issues of commercial solar. So what I find most exciting is really this fundamental match between the generation profile of solar systems and the consumption profile of Australia, of businesses in Australia. And if you structure it properly on the financing side, it can be a value proposition that is cash flow positive from day one. So the client doesn't have to invest an additional dollar. He obviously has to commit to it, but he doesn't have to invest an additional dollar to actually get the benefit of solar. I also hopefully could explain a couple of the pitfalls that are out there, because for that whole value proposition, the underlying assumption is that your solar system produces electricity for 25 years. If you don't use good components, if you don't engineer properly, if you don't install it properly, you're just not going to get the benefit of your 25 years of free electricity. But if you do it right, it is really highly predictable and reliable. And I think this is now what we're going to see over the next few years, that kind of change in the industry, and all of a sudden I hopefully think that this commercial segment will be one of the largest segments in Australia, and not just this little bar which I showed you at the beginning, which a lot of the forecasters say at the moment. And yeah, that's it for me on commercial solar. I hope it gave you a bit of an idea, and if you have questions, just fire them at me. Thank you. Back. So I'm just going to repeat the question so we can capture it on the mic. So the question is about the possible change of the division between STCs and LGCs. So at the moment, up to 100 kilowatts, even a commercial solar business, a commercial solar system is eligible to STCs. The benefits of these STCs, these small technology certificates, these renewable energy certificates, is worth about 30% of the initial investment value. So it's quite significant. If now by the middle of the year, or probably later this year, second half of the year, that gets reduced, that 100 kilowatt threshold gets reduced to 10 kilowatt, it has a significant effect on commercial solar, no doubt about it. Because what's happening then is all of a sudden you're still eligible to LGCs, but LGCs are paid out over time, so time value of money becomes much more complicated. It makes it harder. It will make a lot of companies disappear because it means that they get squeezed into the residential area where it's still relatively simple, but we have hundreds of companies trying to fight for survival. So we will have more solar companies go out of business very quickly. That's clear. I still think the solar case for commercial is quite good. And what I expect is that we will see financial products that actually take the stretched out value of LGCs and combine them as a value upfront, which obviously won't be 30% anymore, but it could be maybe still 15% or something like that. Huh? And this is a discussion which I'm having with some of the energy traders, or not energy, sorry, rec traders at the moment, because they are most suitable to come up with these kind of products. There is no solution at the moment. I think we're all still keeping our fingers crossed that that change won't happen. But you're absolutely right, it will have a big effect. Richard? Yes, so if you don't own your building, if you're a tenant, commercial solar still works for you. There are two factors that need to come into play. One is that you're a long-term tenant. It's very clear that you need to have a long-term interest in that building and that you want to reduce your electricity cost. So if you have a lease of 5 years or even longer, then all you need is basically that the building owner comes to the party. The building owner needs to be in that overall play because it's his roof. He actually needs to sign documents to allow that the system can be installed. But you could, for example, pay the building owner a lease over the roof, and then the tenant can still have the benefit of the offset. So no reason why it shouldn't work, it's just a little bit more complex.
How much interest is it?
Yeah. The energy users, let's start with a easier part of the question. The interest of the energy users is a mixed one. It's sometimes the issue that even if the economic case is very, very strong, it seems that it's still hard to make that decision because in your industrial area, you might be the first one who does it. Right? It's not your core business, and it's maybe a bit difficult to get your head around it, and you're busy with your day-to-day business. So that's the main challenge we have at the moment, to get people to make the decision. They rationally understand it, but then it just drops off their priority list. So, but what we see more and more, if it starts in one area and it's successful there, others will see, they talk about it in their local business chambers, and it will get a bit of momentum. The retailers, luckily at this stage, actually haven't really switched on to commercial solar much at all. There are companies like Origin who did very well on the residential side, but it's simple. Residential is quite simple. So they are just a sales organization, everything else is outsourced. Because on commercial, each commercial system does require a level of detailed engineering and site visits and all that. At the moment, I don't think any of the large retailers is really set up for it yet. And the margins aren't great. And it's less of a retail exercise, it's really more of an engineering exercise you have to master here and a delivery. And at the moment, I don't think that we see any of the big retailers entering that sector successfully anytime soon. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Yes, yeah, it definitely goes into the analysis. Like for example, the school I showed you, we actually have most of the east-facing roofs used for the school because the school consumption goes down after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So we really wanted to capture most of the morning demand in the morning. The risk you run with that type of analysis, and if you then say, okay, I put all my entire array on the western facing side, the these peak and shoulders, they might vary over the next 25 years. Right? And in commercial, to be honest, Alistair, the peaks are usually not during midday. It's actually, we are always looking with shoulder rates. This is the main rates we are offsetting. And a lot of the peaks happen quite late in the afternoon. So 5 o'clock, 5 to 8 is a peak that a lot of businesses have. It varies very much from customer to customer, from area to area. So yes, all this goes into the analysis, absolutely, and we try to optimize the system. And at some stage you just have to say, okay, what's the underlying long-term benefit is to get as many electrons out of your solar system as you possibly can. So let's try to optimize towards that. Sorry, I'm going away. Good question. So what are the network connection charges? And the problem here, it varies so much. At the moment, for example, the solar business case stacks up beautifully for central New South Wales. The network provider there is Essential Energy. And Essential Energy is very easy to deal with. Well, up to 100 kilowatts, really no dramas. If you go down to South Australia, headache all over, even with this very small system. If you go to Queensland, like Ergon and Energex, as soon as you go over 30 kilowatts, you basically need to, the device you were now referring to, you need to protect the grid. So that at no point in time do you ever export any electricity to the grid. And these kind of devices at the moment are around $7,000 to $10,000. So if you have a system that from a commercial perspective and the usage consumption profile, you might put 40 kilowatts in there, we would always scale it down to 30 to avoid that kind of extra costs in the business. I think all this is changing quite rapidly over the next few years, and the fact that now almost routinely the systems we design are really only designed for self-consumption and never really want to export anything. And in most cases, we already designed, particularly the larger ones, with that device that you don't export anything. I think the networks will calm down again and play ball a bit more. But at the moment, you're completely at the mercy of the network providers. That's correct. There are leasing programs available for the residential market. It's just that the take-up isn't that great at this stage. And for the commercial market as well. As I said earlier, I mean, there are products available from small boutique companies all the way up to the big banks. So for example, we're doing a system out in Orange for a company that's a small 20 kilowatt system, and they get their finance lease from Macquarie Bank. So we are listed on Macquarie Bank's accredited supplier list, and or they actually invited us to join them, and so Macquarie Bank has financial lease available. So yes, there is no additional incentive from the government, but it's a pure economic decision whether you want a finance lease or an operating lease, or whether you want to finance it yourself. Yeah, it's only a matter whether it stacks up economically. There are financiers, leasing companies very interested in providing money for these kind of systems. NAB, for example, through a program that's called Environmental Upgrade Agreements, you can borrow $300, $500, $1 million easily. Or big leasing companies like Hafka, $1 million, not a problem for them. It then all comes down to what's your general credit rating as the customer who takes that lease out. Does it still, the rate that you pay for that lease, does it still stack up with your savings? And what we find, in all honesty, is if we look at large consumers of electricity, their rates are so low that we can never make the economics work. Or because they're contestable customers, their bills are structured in a way that their demand charges or fixed charges are very high, and their variable charges in terms of cents per kilowatt hour are relatively low. So in some cases, solar would only substitute about 5 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour. That's just not high enough to make solar work. So the focus really needs to be on the small to medium-sized businesses, or businesses who, for whatever reason, have this general, sustainable responsibility in their policies, and they want to have a 500 kilowatt system on their roof, like IKEA in some cases, or Toyota is doing one now down in Melbourne. Does that answer your question a bit? Yeah. We do, because what we really want, that the client gets a system that makes sense for them. Huh? So if we walk into a business and we see all kinds of inefficiency, then we say go through an energy efficiency audit first of all before you do solar. But you would be surprised, a lot of businesses aren't doing so well these days, and they have gone through these exercises a lot already. So replacing regular lighting with LED lights and stuff like that. And or having little labels on their offices, switch off with us, just things like that. I think a lot of businesses are doing quite all right on that front. We don't then do the audit. We have partner companies who we then put forward and say, we know these guys are doing a good job. And likewise, these companies basically then say, once they have gone through it, if you now consider solar, talk to the guys from ePho. So it's more a partnership as such, but you're absolutely right. If a company just wastes electricity, solar is the wrong starting point. All right, Linda, thank you very much.